interview between Gábor Herendi and István Sörös about the Egyptian pyramids, made in the studio of Veszprém TV in January 2000. Welcome to our program. This is your host Gábor Herendi. It is my pleasure to participate in this discussion, which I dare say is going to reveal a world sensation. The brief line of the story is the following. In May 1999, a land surveyor of Felsőrs was browsing through a book on Egypt and Egyptian mysteries. He immersed more and more in the book and suddenly struck his forehead. I think this was the moment when it could be claimed that the mystery of the building of the Egyptian pyramids was solved. The name of this surveyor is István Sörös, and what else could be my question then? How did you get onto it? It was almost as simple as you introduced it. Last May I came across a Reader's Digest publication which, among other things, discussed the questions related to the Cheops pyramid in the framework of the theories known so far. I was thinking about the data, figures, numbers, the amount of materials that I had to be used, and I had serious doubts of whether it had been possible to carry out such an immense project with sheer human effort. Being a man of technological interest, my curiosity drove me to get some literature on Egypt. I was lucky enough to have Alberto Silotti's work, Egypt, a publication of very high standard, which describes the architecture of ancient Egypt with a number of photographs and illustrations. Which part of the book was the most interesting for you? Well, besides the fact that I was greatly amazed at everything the book contained, I realized that, according to the book, all such ancient buildings are without exception very close to water, and that every building is surrounded with walls. This is what we call church area. The perimeter of the pyramid area is indicated with signs. In these walls there are gates, which I think must have been designed to be floodgates. I thought that water might have had a decisive role during the construction of the building. And why is that so important? On the basis of this book and others, we can claim that these buildings were built with fantastic precision. These old buildings are impressive size, and thus the question is inevitable. These old buildings are of impressive size, and thus the question is inevitable. How were these buildings staked out? As an engineer, I often did the staking out myself, and I can say that it is a job that needs plenty of attention. I was especially impressed by the horizontality of these buildings. What needs to be horizontal is fantastically horizontal in these structures. I know it from personal experience that the human eye is ill-suited for staking out, determining horizontal planes. Obviously, the builders of ancient times did not have such modern levelers at their disposal as engineers of today do. Since I found references to water everywhere in this book, since everything seemed to be related to water somehow, I started to have the suspicion that horizontality was actually provided by the surface, the level of the water concretely. The area surrounded by walls was flooded with water, and the heights of the parts of the structure could be perfectly defined in relation to the surface level of this water. All right, but one might ask the question, where did that great amount of water come from? Since it will be mentioned later, I suggest that we put this topic aside for the time being. We should bring up things of greater importance first. What's there that's even more interesting than this? The pyramids themselves, namely the pyramids of Giza, I simply have to refer to some numbers. The masses and structures of all these buildings are amazing. Such a structure is made up of more than 2.5 million stones, each weighing several tons, and if such a building had to be put together with human effort only, as it is claimed by the known theories, then it would have needed approximately 600 years to complete that. In this respect, Mr. Erich von Däniken, who calculated this, is absolutely right. Though I personally do not believe that extraterrestrial creatures help with putting the buildings together. There must have been other methods to put every stone to its right place, and these methods are actually still there. Browsing through this book, I always came back to this point, because it's a really important thing. There is a description in this book of a certain sunboat which can still be found at the southern foot of Cheops pyramid, reconstructed in a pavilion. This sunboat has an unbelievable size. It's more than 44 meters long, more than 6 meters wide. It has a very shallow draught and has a very long torpedo structure. There is only one photograph of this boat in the book. It was this picture that made me think that this boat may have had a very important role in the construction work.
Eredendően mit mondanak erről a bárkáról, és te szerinted azt?
What is that others say about this boat, and do you agree with others as far as the purpose of the boat is concerned? It's said to have been used for ritual purposes. All the discussions on this matter claim that this was the boat that carried the pharaoh on his last voyage towards the sun, and it was this boat that he used in the afterworld. But the question remains, why are there several more of this boat? Also, it's a fact that its size and appearance do not indicate such a purpose, such a noble purpose at all. Thus, it had another purpose. Yes, I think that was a device used during the construction. I think it was used to lift heavy weights. We can say with some exaggeration that it was a barge derrick or a so-called ship crane. How was it possible to lift such heavy weights with a, let us call it then, barge derrick? After we examined the site itself, it became completely clear that it was an asymmetric construction from side view. The extremely long bow is approximately 5 meters above the surface of the water, thus the boat was superbly suited for nodding a sea turn. It means that the boat tended to move vertically up and down to a great extent, especially if there was a large number of people on board moving forward to the bow. Then the boat nodded, and in this position the weight was tightly tied to the bow with a short piece of rope. When the people on board, a great number of them, moved to the stern, then to the bow of the boat, rose together with the weight and could then move it anywhere. Let us not increase the interest anymore. What is the solution then? How were the pyramids built? To be able to answer that question satisfactorily, I have to mention that at the end of last June I was able to participate in an expedition to Egypt with financial support from my friend Sándor Semsei. To answer the question that I asked myself at home in Hungary, we surveyed all the locations and tried to get the answer to your question. What were your experiences on the spot? When I could be almost completely sure that the journey would be possible, I got Randy Jenner's travelogue entitled Egypt. This book provides you with all the necessary details on everything about this wonderful country that is a must for the traveler, among others the geologic, topographic and geographic characteristics. I was quite surprised when reading about Lake Karun. According to the author, this lake is now situated 66 meters deeper than in ancient times. Geologists have already proved that this number is entirely reliable and acceptable. It's also well known that this lake and Fayum oasis have always been supplied with water by the Nile. In ancient times, it was done through a valley in east-west direction. Geologists have already proved that this number is entirely reliable and acceptable. It's also well known that this lake and Fayum oasis have always been supplied with water by the Nile. In ancient times, it was done through a valley in east-west direction. Thus, it is evidence for the assumption that the Nile must have been flowing 10 meters higher in average, at least in times of flooding. How fantastic this change during the past 4,700 years has been is perfectly proven by the fact that water is now supplied to the lake by an artificial canal from the Asyut Dam 400 kilometers further south. Otherwise, the lake would dry out. Now another map that shows the Giza Plateau and the area surrounding the pyramids. I would like to draw your attention to the signs of high water level in the immediate surroundings of the pyramids that clearly constitute evidence for the building method that made use of water, as I have already mentioned. Although this very same map is not perfectly suitable to show these topographic characteristics, let me just say that on this ridge, which is at the same height with the foot of the pyramids, a solidified dried-out mass of silt can be found. Moreover, not just here, but along this side as well. In these extractions in a quarry, clear signs of river silt can be found, which unambiguously prove that once the river Nile was flowing at a much greater height. Just to add one more thing, in approximately this area I myself found root fossils in a vertical extraction, not just one, but several ones, very close to the foot of the pyramid. It means then that once there must have been flourishing vegetation in the area, which obviously makes the presence of great amount of water necessary.
Az meg mindenképpen a nagy mennyiségű víznek és a mindenkori víznek a jelenlétét feltételezi.
What other methods did you use in your examination of the area? If a surveyor is looking for water and is interested in relative heights of things, then he will try to determine the position of such places. I did not have the opportunity to do the expedition fully equipped with all kinds of modern, up-to-date devices, and it was not what we were planning to do either. Thus I took with me a very simple but suitable piece of equipment that I designed to be able to examine horizontal planes and an aneroid barometer which is capable of determining height differences with a 1 meter accuracy. Since then I have managed to acquire topographic maps that made it possible for me to check the results of my survey. Interestingly, I got the same results with only minute differences as indicated on the topographic maps. Let us get back to the ship. Where we stopped was that the ship could nod. Indeed, this ship is a piece of equipment of a crucial importance concerning the building technology in general and the building technology of the pyramids in particular. After having visited the site, which I am going to tell you about shortly, I can prove without any doubt whatsoever that this boat really used to be a barge derrick. This amazing structure was discovered in 1954 near the southern foot of Cheops Pyramid and was restored with several years of work and is now kept in an air-conditioned pavilion where the public can see it. Its assumed function, as I have already told you, was ritual. I am a man with technological interest and quite experienced in sailing. I feel close to ships and boats. I have known it for a long time that every boat and ship has a function, and they are built with that particular function in mind. That is why we can talk about floating structures of different kinds. This boat is undoubtedly a tool. To put it simply, it's a boat whose wooden structure was built in a very sturdy, robust way. You can say it was simply roped together. It's a structure that can be taken apart. It perfectly satisfied the needs of nodding mentioned before. The methods of construction that we find if looking at it more closely are astonishing. For instance, the bow and the stern were replaceable because these were the parts that were most liable to wear and tear, abrasion by the ropes and other kinds of stress. The boat was equipped with a load control device which was designed to save this expensive structure with two big weights. If the weight on the bow was too heavy, a safety rope simply tore. The bow opened downwards, and thus the tension was not transmitted to the other parts of the structure, which was made of imported material, Lebanese cedar, either by the Egyptians themselves or by the Phoenicians to order. It is an important characteristic of the boat that it was not suited for sailing on rivers. It did not have sails or a mast, and the number of oars was too small for the great size of the boat. Obviously, it could only be used locally on still water. How could the ship lift the weights? You have not actually told us yet about the exact mechanism of nodding. Well, approximately 40 well-fed men had to move along the longitudinal back and forth. When they moved to the bow, it nodded. The slab of the stone was tied to the bow with a short piece of rope, and then the people went to the stern. The center of gravity of the boat moved as well. The bow rose and lifted stone too. The ship, together with the weight, tied to its bow could move anywhere on the surface of the water. The weight was put down with the very same method, the only difference being that this time the people on board had to move forward to the bow. Now that we have everything, water, a barge derrick, let us not increase our viewers' curiosity any further. How were the pyramids built? To be able to demonstrate the process visually, my friends and I created a computer animation, and I would like to illustrate the building technology that I find most likely with this program. This work, as any other construction, started with building the substructures. Within the area surrounded by the walls, first an approximately 60 centimeter thick, perfectly ground paneling of limestone was made, which can still be very clearly today. This layer of limestone obviously had an insulating function, because the Giza Plateau is made up of sandstone, and the water needed for the construction would have leaked away in the sandstones quite quickly. Besides the substructure, there were some other supplementary facilities where the building materials were introduced to the construction site. This area was then flooded by water through the lock gates. By then the boats, the barge derricks, had already been assembled on the construction site, that is, the area of the pyramids. The actual work began with the boats, since there were several of them laying down the first white outer row of limestone of the pyramid. This was the paneling that covered the surface of the pyramid. After this square of limestone was ready, its height was increased further and further, with the help of the boats, of course. When the area of the pyramid was kind of separated from the rest of the site, a pool of water was formed inside the walls of the pyramid. The boats were floating on the surface of this pool, and since the stones were lifted inside and laid in the area of the pyramid, the level of water was always rising because of the displacement of the stones. Thus the boats themselves were lifted higher and higher by the rise of the water level in the pool. This process continued until the boats were simply unable to lift materials into the pool directly. Then another quite spectacular stage of the construction work began. It's my conviction that the pairs of boats pulled the stones up to the pool step by nodding in the opposite rhythm. That is, when one boat was nodding down, the other was nodding up. I think it can be seen quite well in the computer animation. First, we demonstrate an earlier stage of the process, and then another one when the boats are already high up, several tens of meters from the lower level of the pool.
Több 10 méter magasra a medencének az alsó vízszintjétől.
Egyébként oda hogy jutottak?
How did they manage to get the water up to such a height? Before answering your question, let me say that the last pictures of the animation show that we were extremely careful to indicate the proportions of the boats and the pyramid in accordance with the real facts. It is astonishing how big these boats were as compared to the size of the pyramid. And now let me answer your question concerning the method to get the water up to the building level of the pyramid. Because it was obviously there. I had to be used for leveling, since all the rows of stones are perfectly horizontal, and of course the boats had to float on something too to be able to do their job. I am convinced that the water got up to this higher pool by the hydrostatic principle of communicating vessels. This is yet to be proved, and the uncovering of this system has not been done, but all the surface and underground facilities are there, the function of which cannot have been anything else but being communicating vessels. I would like to draw your attention to the peculiar fact that if you take a look at the cross-section of the Cheops pyramid, then you can see that there are horizontal and vertical passages from the lowest chamber, usually claimed to be a burial chamber or an incomplete burial chamber. After a while, these passages end, and thus seem to be blind shafts, but it is my conviction that once these passages went on and were connected to these fully visible shafts. Considering the size of these passages and the amount of water that could be moved in them, I can safely claim that any amount of water could be carried to any height by those amazing ancient building masters. And then you return to Hungary. Yes, we did. One of the first things I did was trying to get all the materials organized, which was not easy at all because of the many impressions we had. I considered one thing to be crucially important, a thing that I have not mentioned so far. Before we visited Egypt, I assumed that there had to be some binding material between the stones of the pyramids, since a technology using water is only applicable in that case. Otherwise, the water would have leaked away in the gaps between the stones. Thus, there had to be some kind of binding material between the stones, and it was actually there. We could find such binding material next to, on and under every stone. This material was of relatively high solidity. I took samples of this material from several places, and the head of the Department of Silicate Chemistry at the University of Veszprém was so kind to analyze these samples. We were not surprised at all to learn that this material was gypsum. Approximately 5 kilometers to the northwest from the Giza Plateau there is a gypsum and alabaster mine currently worked. It was this mine that provided or could have provided the large quantity of binding material of very high quality and that we have found in the area of the pyramids. If we return to the question of the construction itself, there is one more thing to be answered. How did they finish the work? That is, what did they do in the last stage when there was not enough room for the boat? Yes, this question puzzled me too. Obviously, they were rising with the rise of the water level as far as they could. After a while, these sizable boats grew too big for the room available. Before it happened, they were disassembled and lowered on the side of the pyramid. We know that is what happened to them, since that is the way they were found by archaeologists. I think the builders accumulated a great amount of building material on the highest point of this incomplete pyramid, that is on the top of a truncated pyramid. After the building material was up there, the boats were disassembled and lowered. The top of the pyramid was built of this accumulated material only as a crust, that is, the very top of the pyramid must be hollow, a startling conclusion. Unfortunately, I do not have any evidence for this claim. It is only an assumption. It would be interesting to examine this matter, and if it were true, it would be a fantastic result. That is exactly what I was to ask. What are your further plans in the future concerning Egypt, if you have any? Well, I'm in a difficult situation, since I have never been, I will never be an Egyptologist. Basically, I'm not competent in this science of Egyptology. I'm a builder, and as a builder, I'm interested in the house. I am fully convinced that after so many experiences and so much research, I have found the secret, the basic technology of ancient megalithic buildings. It's the key that some way or other fits into the keyhole of all kinds of megalithic buildings. I'm also convinced that it does not stop at the borders of Egypt. I have a serious drive to return to this wonderful country and do some more researches among the fantastic stones. I would like to find out how these stones were dressed. This is a very interesting area of this field of science. I would like to uncover, map and draw the plan of the facilities and buildings that I consider very important. I would like to be amazed by how brilliant the builders of ancient times were. Thank you for the interview. Thank you too.